Right. So we are going to get started now. So again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Campbell. I'm the Associate Director of Audit and Compliance, and I'm joined by my colleague, Jackie. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jacqueline Pastelio-Jakutu. I'm Jackie, and I'm the Strategic Planning Officer for OSSE DOT.
Cool. So we want to welcome everyone to the 2021 Start of School Year Training Series. This session is working together to ensure transportation success. We obviously know that we're in unprecedented times, and so we're doing our best to create a nice, seamless process for schools and LEAs that will be preparing for in-person services this coming fall. So just a few overview and announcements before we get started. The Start of School webpage for OSSE is available through osse.dc.gov/startofschool. There you can review the different priorities that OSSE has taken this year as obviously us in transportation. We have data connectivity, LEA faculty and staff data collection, early access to student data, as well as no shots, no school. On the website, you'll find links for dates and deadlines, as well as resources and tools for all of the different priorities this school year. Here we have a look at our SY 2021 Start of School Summer Training Calendar. This will also be located on our website, and as well as the OSSE training registration system and the Start of School website. You can see sprinkled throughout, we have a few of our TOTE sessions that will be offered this summer. And through our presentation today, Jackie will talk a little bit about TOTE and its changes and adjustments to deal with the upcoming school year. 2020 Kid Talk will be virtual. It will take place Thursday, August 13th, 2020. It will include middle and high school staff coming together to discuss academic and social and emotional needs of incoming ninth graders, counselors, special education coordinators, English learner coordinators, student support staff, and school leaders are all welcome. To RSVP, you can contact Janae Eason at the number email below. So today, obviously, we're going to be focusing on transportation, and we're going to have a great discussion today regarding a few aspects of preparation for transportation services for the upcoming 2021 fall school year. This agenda will, for the most part, be followed as best we can as far as the time. Some of this content, if any of you are familiar with this in years past being presented through the Start of School Summit, will be the same. However, obviously there will be a few changes when it comes to our guidance for preparation this year, as well as some updates from Jackie on our TOTE system, the status of that and how we can help you there. We will likely move through the normal content pretty quickly and likely get to question and answers a little bit earlier than probably we normally would, because I feel like at this point in time, I think it's probably great to make sure we can address as many of the questions that you may have in preparing for transportation services for the start of school year. But if we do, gloss over everything too fast, don't hesitate to let us know. Jackie will definitely keep an eye on the chat and let us know when someone has their hand raised or has a question in the chat. Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Our session objectives today, there are three main objectives. One is understanding the importance and accurate and on-time data submission. We're going to talk about our time frame. We're also going to talk about the impact of inaccurate student data. Secondly, understanding the new timeline for this year's data submission. From your perspective, it's going to involve determining student schedules, as well as understanding our deadlines and overall, and more importantly, at this point in time, the DOT timeframe to prepare services. Thirdly, We're going to make sure we understand the key supports for parents and families. We're going to review our parent communication that we've been doing for a few years, as well as how we can provide support to the families that we serve. So what's new for SPED Transportation POCs this year? Obviously, we have an updated deadline for data submission given the health pandemic. The current state of operation, our deadline for data submission was originally the first Monday in June. It had been moved back several weeks ago to July 24th. This was communicated to LEA leaders as well as data managers a few weeks ago through means of meetings as well as additional communication. We have a simplified transportation data system. OSSE DOT will complete system updates to accommodate alternative schedules for LEAs. Obviously, we know schedules will be different this year, at least for the start. But this will assist with simplifying the TRF process in the upcoming school year. And just a note about our deadline of July 24th, don't get too hung up on that. As we go through, we're going to talk about the time frame that it takes DOT to prepare services, which is a little bit more important at this point in time. So 5 things transportation POCs should know. Routing activities depend on timely and accurate student data submissions. The deadlines as well, July 24th, and we are still holding with our new students 2 weeks prior to the start of the school year. Understanding when you will gain access to new students in your LEA. Understanding that OSSE DOT has 10 business days to process requests. And lastly, the reimbursement policy for special circumstances. All right, so first we're going to start with DOT LEA guidance for timely transportation services for this school year. Before we look at our timeframes that were established, we just wanted to make sure we communicate and discuss a little bit about the considerations and decisions for the school year 2021. For any LEA that will be providing in-person education services, we want to make sure that some student level decisions are made, those being student assignments and how those students will be assigned to a particular schedule. Basically, for the purposes of transportation, we would need to know which students will be in school on which days, what their schedule is, so that we understand when preparing our service, which is schedule based, we have an understanding of which days we are supposed to transport which students to school. Obviously, from our perspective, we asked to prioritize service preparations and data submissions for students with disabilities. And basically what we're saying there is submit the required school calendars and transportation request forms as soon as those decisions have been made and we're ready to move forward with preparation. A few notes: if the considerations and decisions are delayed into the transportation preparation timeframe, we do ask LEAs to consider and prepare and utilize parent or LEA reimbursement options. And just a last note here, if your LEA is not offering in-person services for students with disability, no action is needed in TOTE for transportation. So our guidance for school year 2021, we wanted to highlight some key operational processes for LEAs to make note of in order for DOT to appropriately complete start of school year preparations and to deliver timely service at the start of the new school year. So what we're looking at here on the top half of the chart are the data submissions. Our system has been open for over 2 or 3 weeks now and ready to receive school calendars as well as transportation request forms through direct access in TOTE, as well as reaching out to the TOTE support team. Our transportation preparation activities that we look to do after the deadline include data verification, system configuration, data transfers, routing development, our QA process, routing assignments, practice routes, as well as communication to LEAs and schools. Now, obviously, when we look at the calendar today, we're at the 21st of July, and I definitely understand that. However, we had to make sure that we were preparing a time frame for our earliest starting LEAs, who originally provided start dates of early August. So after following those dates being shared, these timeframes were developed. And after the development of these timeframes, we established an actual time period. If these timeframes are not met, we established an actual time period that DOT requires to go through those transportation preparation items. That's the work that we have to do to process transportation requests, complete quality assurance, route students, as well as practice the routes and communicate with parents and LEAs. So obviously the dates above are based on schools starting between August 24th and August 31st. DOT, based on the information that we have received from LEAs indicating their start date in eSchool Plus, we will be and have been conducting outreach to those LEAs that start early to see what supports we need to put in place in order to provide service. Again, going through this exercise, we were able to establish that we need no less than 20 business days to prepare for first day of school services for any LEA. And then lastly, our TOTE support can be reached Monday through Friday between 8 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. So now we're going to go through some of our existing content from previous years. Again, I apologize if we move kind of quickly through this, but I think it'll probably benefit us so that we can have enough time at the end of the session to address any questions and concerns that anyone may have. All right, data submission and verification. So there are two major data buckets or data submissions that we require in order for us to process transportation requests and ultimately provide transportation service. The first bucket is calendars for schools that eligible students will be attending. Accurate calendar information is essential to scheduling students. The information that we require when entering calendars are bell times, exception days, half days, holidays, and PD days. And again, obviously with this year being different, the calendars that we submit are going to have to also now include the dates that the student or the days that the students will be expected to be in school. And Jackie will talk a little bit about that later when we discuss TOTE. Accurate student information. So we want to make sure that we have the accurate address by which we're going to pick the student up in the morning and drop the student off in the afternoon. We want to make sure we have the correct school as well as the correct program. And now, obviously, the correct day of the week to make sure that that is the day the student will be attending school and receiving in-person services. So when we think of the impact of inaccurate or late data submissions, we think of an increased risk of service failure. We think of route instability or ultimately, worst case scenario, no transportation service. If we don't have the correct address and don't know where to pick the student up, then we will not be able to provide service. If we have an incorrect attending school, then we'll be looking at a bus driver with a student on the bus outside of a school that they do not attend. And we want to make sure we can do what we can to avoid that at all costs. So then we want to talk about our verification processes. DOT goes through a process where they complete verification calls on every calendar as well as every transportation request form that's submitted. For each calendar, we reach out to the individual school who entered the calendar in order to validate the information to make sure we have the correct bell time so that we do have the right time that we're supposed to arrive and drop students off for service, for instruction. We also complete verification calls For every transportation request form that we receive, each TRF that is entered by the LEA, we make sure to reach out to a parent or guardian to confirm that information. Once we receive any feedback that may be different, we utilize Box, where we communicate the discrepancies that we discover through our verification calls. Whether it be the transportation point of contact or the special education point of contact or the data manager, we reach out and let them know that discrepancies have been discovered. They're located in Box, and we ask that they be corrected in order for the student to receive service. And so for LEAs, we want to ask, make sure that it's given thought what data verification is done at the LEA or school level prior to submitting this information. Once eligibility is determined at the deadline prior to the start of the school year. So when do we complete data verification in preparation to submit a transportation request form? When do you collect student transportation information? Is it a form that is filled out and completed prior to the end of the previous school year? Or is there a process over the summer by which LEAs collect and verify student information? We just want to make sure that that process from the LEA level is given thought in order to provide accurate information for transportation. Just again, so quick check for understanding questions. The two most important data submissions required to set up transportation. One is the calendars. The second is transportation request forms. That has not changed. And then two, for you guys to think about, how will you ensure accurate data in student TRF submissions? LEA and parent communication. We're going to start with our parent communication. Each year for the past few years, we have been sending out a DOT parent letter. This parent letter is sent out shortly after the deadline for data submission, where we are informing parents and guardians of eligible students for whom OSSE DOT has not received TRFs for. What we want to do is we want to encourage the parent to reach out to the enrolled school or the LEA to make sure that the appropriate resource has the correct information to submit the TRF. Again, when we're doing this hand in hand. We want to make sure that if we expect a transportation request form from a student's family, a student that is eligible for service, we want to make sure that somebody is in communication with the parent in addition to the work that you guys always do, or just to make sure that they're aware of the status of the transportation service for the upcoming school year. Typically, our letter goes out after the deadline. That may be adjusted in the coming weeks for this school year. Obviously, with quite a few LEAs still having not decided yet if they're going to be providing in-person services. So we're going to definitely keep a close eye on that over the next coming weeks. We developed a DOT parent checklist to kind of aid in this notification. The checklist will be available on our website. It provides parents key dates to be aware of in preparation for the school year. If they had not heard anything from the school or the LEA by a certain time, they want to make sure that they're reaching out, as well as if they haven't heard anything from transportation by a certain time, they want to make sure that they're reaching out as well. We want to give them an understanding of the appropriate action steps by each person or team that needs to be completed in order for services to be set up. And lastly, for our parent communication is our DOT postcard letter, which we've been doing for several years now. Prior to the start of the school year, we provide a postcard or a letter that we send to parents and guardians that provide the transportation details of the routed students prior to the start of the school year. This is the equivalent of granting the LEAs in schools access to the rosters in TOTE. So once we complete our routing activities and all of our students have been routed, that information is presented and made available in our TOTE system in order for school officials as well as LEAs to see the transportation details for each of the students that they submitted a transportation request form for. This letter, the purpose of this letter is to formally send it to the parents and guardians as well. In addition to this letter, we do a wave of calls prior to the week of the school start, also giving them a telephone call to provide this same information to them as well. As far as LEA communication, each year we provide a LEA checklist, items and tasks that LEA leaders should be aware of to monitor student transportation preparation. Making sure that you guys are updating eSchool Plus with appropriate POCs, so that when we advertise sessions like these and we're reaching out to all of the transportation point of contacts as well as the special education coordinators, that all of the individuals who have a stake in the information that we share can participate and receive it. Making sure that we attend mandatory TOTE training in order to gain access, data submission deadlines, as well as use of the early access app to prepare services for incoming new students, which we'll talk about shortly. And again, a check for understanding, when will we send communications to parents? We're going to be sending them shortly after the deadline. That will be reviewed this year. But most importantly, we'll be sending it prior to the start of the school year for all of the students that will be receiving in-person services and providing them the transportation details, what time we'll be picking them up from which address, and what time we'll be dropping them off into which address as well. How do you gain access to the new TOTE system? I know, Jack, you would be pretty hard pressed to find anybody who doesn't know the answer to this nowadays, but you do have to attend mandatory training in order to get access to our TOTE system. So the early access Qlik app, we're going to move through this section a bit quickly until we get to LEA reimbursement. But what we want to talk about is what type of information is in the early access Qlik app that OSSE has developed a couple of years ago, and how you can use it from a transportation perspective. So what is the app? The app provides timely and appropriate data to LEAs in order for them to plan and prepare to meet the needs of students with disabilities. It includes information about the students that are pre-enrolled but not yet attending. So therefore, you would not see them show up in your SIS or SEDS. It does include a list of new incoming students who are eligible for transportation. This app is updated daily starting in April 2020 and reflects changes in enrollment. Access to app is granted to data managers, head of schools, principals, special education points of contacts. If you do not have access to these, there will be information on the website in order to make sure you're able to get access to the Qlik app. So for early access to students with disabilities app, how should I use this app to prepare for transportation? We ask that maybe you review the app on a weekly basis to identify new and incoming students to your LEA who are eligible for transportation. And again, this is just a side note. This early access app is for students that are new to your LEA so that you can get that information ahead of time and begin preparing services. You already have access to all of your returning students in TOTE in order to submit data submissions and transportation request forms. So we ask that you gather and prepare information needed to submit a TRF in TOTE for these students, even though you cannot yet submit the TRF. But what that'll do is it'll prepare you so that once access is granted, the submission of the TRF will be very quick and we can begin our turnaround in order to provide services. We ask that you possibly have a backup plan for transportation utilizing our LEA reimbursement policy for the start of the school year, which we'll talk about shortly. Our goal is to ensure that students are appropriately routed and receive transportation services on the first day of school or as soon as possible thereafter. If there is going to be a need to use LEA reimbursement, we want to make sure that that is set up, a TRF is submitted, and then we can move forward with processing the TRF to get the student on the yellow school bus. So, as we said, LEA reimbursement. There are conditions for transportation reimbursement. If through no fault of your own, you're unable to arrange transportation through OSSE DOT, then that you may provide such transportation directly through an agent or contractor. in order to provide service for the student. And you can submit a request for reimbursement for transportation up to the first 20 school days of the school year. In order to receive a reimbursement, a TRF must be submitted. This is only for students that are new to your LEA, where access is not granted in time for a TRF submission. So again, we talk about new students to your LEA and us needing those TRFs no less than 10 days prior to the start of the school year. So if you do not gain access, again, through no fault of your own, in time to meet that deadline, then that student will be eligible for LEA reimbursement. And just some notes on certification, preparing and submitting. There will be a certification form, a Form W-9, an attendance record will be needed, proof of mileage as well, and an invoice if applicable, or proof of payment, and then submission to our box system so we can have the request and process the claim. When should I check the early access app for new students to my LEA? Again, we ask for that to be done weekly so that you can keep a constant idea of the students that will be entering your LEA and what needs, what transportation needs they have, or what other needs they may have that need to be prepared within the school building. Can LEAs be reimbursed for LEA provided transportation for students returning to the same LEA? The answer to number 2 is no. You have access to the students that are returning to your LEA in our TOTE system and are free to enter a transportation request form, once decisions have been made. So no, the answer to that is no for returning students. LEA reimbursement is for new students to your LEA. And then the TR submission deadline for new students, again, 10 business days prior to the start of your school year. And so the next section we have are some TOTE system updates. Jackie's going to walk us through those, and then we will open up our chat, check for any questions, as well as open up discussions and for any questions that anyone may have. Jackie, I'll trigger the slides for you.
All right, thanks so very much. Sorry, I'm also troubleshooting with someone trying to get into the class, so I apologize for that. So as you guys know, in order to get access to TOTE, there's 2 things that we ask that you do is to complete a training. So far, we've trained over 300 and plus users since last year, since we have upgraded the system. And then also we're asking that if you are changing LEAs this year, that you work with your data managers to make sure that they are decommission you from your old school, and then whatever new school that you're going to, that they add you as the transportation POC as well. So far, one of the things that we ask folks for is that while internally our system has single sign-on, we ask that you create kind of like a strong password as well to make sure that you are keeping in line with some of our data security issues. So our security guidelines consist of letters, numbers, and symbols. We ask that you have a maximum of about 8 to 10 characters. Make sure you don't share your password. And then if you have 504 students, we ask that you're following, whatever data privacy guidelines and, the process for sending those to our DOT.data team so that we can add those into the system for you. As we move forward, ideally with the new system, with SEDS, some of this information will potentially change, but for now, we ask that you send your 504 students to us via the normal way, via box, and then we will then add those students into the system for you. Next slide. So some of the things that we heard you say last year and before as we deployed the new TOTE system, as well as with some of the changes that are needed for COVID, we've made some additional enhancements to the system to ensure that we are able to track and monitor students as they are going to and from various programs or they're in various grouping. We know that there's not a final definition in terms of what are the guidelines in terms of whether or not you're doing an A, B, or C, or whatever that schedule is. But we ask that as soon as you know that information, the system is ready for you to put that in. So we have made some adjustments to the school program names, as well as the school calendar. Now have the grouping of the students that enable you to identify the cohorts, as well as the transportation request form. We have simplified that screen. And so now the screen is basically a 5-screen guided access with basically, you're just answering the key questions that are needed for transportation requests. And I believe there's a total of no more than 5 to 10 questions that you would have to answer for transportation. We've also incorporated in the system duplicate program restrictions because in the past what we've noticed was that we've had orphan programs that were not tied to students in calendar. So we've done some enforcement into the system as well for that, as well as identifying students with expired IEP. There would be an override process for this year, understanding that you guys are going through and updating your IEPs in the SED system. But right now the system is set that students with IEP, there will be a restriction within the system that you won't be able to put in the transportation request. We also ask that the team is currently verifying their calendars against the calendars that you put in eSchool Plus. So our parent communication team, which you guys have worked with, Shanika, some of you that are or have been with us for a while, we're working with that team to kind of notify the schools to figure out the calendars that you put in eSchool Plus, if that is your actual calendar or if you're changing your date. And as Jason mentioned before, if your school is doing virtual for the first couple of weeks of school or whenever time that is, you don't need to do anything in the system, but we ask as soon as you make that decision to go from virtual to in-person, that you notify us so we can help you coordinate and enter in your calendars and your transportation requests. Like I stated earlier, the transportation form is now a guided 3 screens that allows inline edits for the address and the contact. So a lot of that information can be put in while you're doing the transportation request. And we have logic built in for the groupings as well, based on what was announced so far. Next slide. So to gain access, if you are new, everyone has to attend a mandatory training. All training are listed on the training website. You can register for those trainings. There's typically 1 or 2 training a week. Here are the dates for the training. We have a training today at 3 p.m. after this, as well as what we're working with schools to do this year, because understanding that the deadlines are so short, we're working with you guys to figure out items that we can automate for you, i.e. your calendars. So we'll work with you to give you a calendar spreadsheet that you would submit to us and we will load it, as well as trying to figure out how to best to support you with the type timeline for start of school with everything that's going on. Next slide. So just to check for understanding, like we said, how do you gain access to the new TOTE application? If you are new, you would attend one of our mandatory training. If you are not new and you are staying with your LEA, you will still have access to your existing school. If you're transferring, you would let us know, as well as ensure that your data manager grants you the appropriate access in SEDS. In terms of your transportation rosters, I didn't go over that in the training, but in the overview, but we do have transportation rosters into the application. You can view those, and there's a separate tab for that in the system. And do we pull data from eSchool Plus? So while we're not pulling the data from eSchool Plus right now, we are using that data this year for verification to ensure that we are in line with the dates and timelines, because what we found out after our verification is that a lot of those calendar dates are changing as you guys are making new decisions, or as you guys are getting new guidelines from the CDC and from the health related agencies, and information back from your parents.
All right, thanks, Jackie. When we were presenting this in person last year, we had POC planning time. Just some questions to kind of spark any discussion or any future questions or questions anyone may have now. One of the biggest things that we have, even though it's, we are still going through a period of time where we're establishing calendars, is making sure that data verification is still on our minds. And we understand that while, dates have not been set in stone, as well as the mode by which students receive instruction has not been set in stone, we want to make sure that we are preparing for, if there is going to be any in-person instruction, that, data verification is still on the forefront of our mind. We want to just make sure that we are constantly thinking about how, do you currently verify student transportation data? When's the best time for you to verify this? Is it more than one time? Should you do something at the end of the school year, as well as something closer to the beginning of the school year? And then how do you communicate to parents how changes should be submitted? We want to make sure that when we're communicating to parents is in line with what LEAs and schools are communicating. So any feedback that anyone would want to have there can definitely be shared. And then lastly, before we jump into our resources, as promised, I wanted to open this up for any questions that anyone may have. I know this session was scheduled for an hour and 30 minutes, but obviously we wanted to move through it a little quicker than normal, just so that we can have enough time to get to any questions that anyone may have. So I'm going to try to switch my screen with keeping this up and check the chat. I believe we have a couple questions in the chat.
So one of the questions is, how do I get the calendar spreadsheet? So I will send that out. Jason or I will send that out after the session. We'll just reply back to the folks that attended the training, and we'll attach the calendar spreadsheet.
Okay. We have a question. What happens if TRFs can't be submitted until July 31st? What we ask you to do is keep an eye on the time frame. So we understand that we just shared that there's a deadline of the 24th, but understanding that maybe some more decisions may come once the 31st comes. Just keep in mind DOT's time frame and need to prepare services of being 4 weeks, 20 business days. That's going to be the time by rule of thumb that we need in order to prepare services en masse when we're talking about the start of the school year, getting and processing a high number of transportation request forms. So I would say if you cannot do it by the 31st, take a look at when your school is slated to start, and if it's going to be under 4 weeks, then reach out to our TOTE support team. Jackie's working with them, and we'll open up if we need to work with our routing team to see what we can do to best support. We do understand that there might be some tight turnarounds, which is why we are also asking for you to prepare to possibly use LEA reimbursement, our LEA reimbursement program. Jackie, right under that, there's a question. Is there a limit to the number of student groups? So I'm guessing that means the student groups or the cohorts within the school.
So for us, the cohorts are guided by the school. So I believe the schools are making that decision based on class size and how many students they can have on the class. We are we do have social distancing guidelines that will be also enforced on the bus. And so we have documentation that will go out to parents as well as be posted on the website in terms of what those guidances and are. But we are not making the decision on the cohort. The cohort information is coming from you, the school, because that's in line with what your classroom size, how many students you can have in the class, and all of those types of things, and whatever factors you guys are using to make those guidances.
Okay, I'm scrolling up. I see a question. This was early. I'm sorry. 1 second. How does this work for a McKinney-Vento family that's currently staying in a shelter? Hodge, I'm not sure if you're still here, but just want to make sure I'm covering this when this question was asked, obviously, to make sure it matches the context in which it was asked. But just generally speaking, our McKinney-Vento students that are eligible for services would still go through the same process for data submission in order to receive services. If the student that is eligible and under McKinney-Vento is not accessible in TOTE, then all you would need to do is reach out to our TOTE support team, and they will ensure that you are granted access to the student in order to submit a transportation request form. And if I didn't get that correct in the context, please let me know.
Yeah, sorry, this is Keena Hodge. I just to follow up on that question. I guess I'm wondering in terms of the actual address. So if a family right now is staying in a shelter, they may potentially be moving to a different location. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how often they're going to be moving. Right now, they seem to be pretty stable at whatever shelter that they're in. But the mom has told me that they're potentially going to be moving again. So I'm just thinking about like the time frames for changing.
Understood. And I could definitely understand that. And we're all going to be subject to that, to how quickly they're able to let us know. Once the school year begins, our processing time for transportation requests does go down a bit. Obviously, our policy grants us 10 days to complete a transportation request from the date that it's submitted to providing service. However, given the nature that once we're in the school year and the idea is that we're getting less transportation requests, we'd be able to turn that around quickly. So all we would say is just to make sure you stay in contact with them and as best you can. Make sure we're notified as soon as possible as to when you anticipate or when they anticipate the address to change. And you can work with our TOTE support team on the best time to submit the transportation request for those new students. For those students with address changes.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. How do I get the calendars? Oh, I'm sorry. Jack, you already got that?
Yeah.
The
next question is the one from Tiffany.
Okay.
Relatively to the new to the role, what happens if parents decide transportation is not needed? Should we reach out to the parents before submitting transportation requests?
Okay, excellent. So absolutely. If you guys do hear from a parent that they're choosing not to utilize the services, we ask that those updates, be reflected as best they can on the student's IEP, as well as notifying us through our system if the student will not be utilizing transportation services. That way we can remove that student from the listing of students that we would expect a TRF for, as well as that record not showing up as being outstanding for missing a transportation request form. And just to kind of spin off of that, obviously, in this time we might have a lot of those. We want to make sure that if parents are deciding to transport their students as well, they can reach out to our resource center for information on parent reimbursement. Okay, do we have any other questions? This is a fairly small group, so if you don't feel comfortable in the chat, feel free to come off of mute, introduce yourself and ask a question. We definitely have some time left, but we don't need to utilize it all. While folks are thinking if they do have any additional questions, I just wanted to go to our resource slide. Throughout our session today, Jackie and I both mentioned our TOTE support team. They are manning our TOTE support line still during their normal business hours at 576-5520, as well as the email dot.data@dc.gov. We did mention our Parent Resource Center a couple times as well. They are still manning their lines at 576-5000. And at this time, I would probably say email is probably the best way to reach out to us. You can also find our correspondence email on our website. And then here's our website as well. Again, this session, as well as the slide deck, along with the other slide decks and the other sessions for the OSSE Start of School priorities that we talked about earlier, the no shots, no school, the data connectivity, et cetera, will be available on our website. So if any of your colleagues that are more interested or need to know any information about that, they would have that resource available to them there. All right, and just circling back to see if anyone had any other questions.
What would cause a parent reimbursement to be rejected?
Oh, we have one in the chat. What
Yes.
did it say? I'm sorry.
What would cause a parent reimbursement to be rejected?
Parent reimbursement to be rejected. Parent reimbursement, under normal circumstances, I'd say this, under normal circumstances, parent reimbursement would be rejected if OSSE DOT was continuing to provide a bus. So let's just a scenario if, and again, I'm speaking during regular times here, and I'll flip over to kind of, I guess, our new times and what it would look like there. But under normal circumstances, if we're continuing to send a bus to a residence to provide service for a student, and we are providing that within our prescribed time frame, either scheduled or adjusted and notified, and a parent somehow was missing the bus, or a student maybe was not ready, and as a result had to take the child to school on their own, that would be that would prompt a review and a possible rejection of parent reimbursement. Basically, we are there providing our service. We have communicated the time by which our service will be provided, and the child is not boarding the bus during that time. So if we're continually still willing and providing the timely service, that would cause parent reimbursement to be rejected. So now thinking about it for this upcoming school year, there obviously is going to be a lot of different, I guess you could say, interpretations of how parent transportation reimbursement can be rejected. We do understand that families are going to be making some decisions that are best for them and best for their children that we provide service to. And so I think there's going to be a lot more openness in us providing parent reimbursement during this time to families who may not feel 100% comfortable with sending their student to school on our school bus.
The other thing I wanted to point out is that, like I stated earlier, we do have a TOTE overview session at 3 p.m. today. That will be led by our data and tech team. I would highly recommend, if you have the time, please sit in on that session. The team will be going over the TOTE screens, so you'll be able to see what the screens look like. as well as see the program change, all of the program changes that was made within the application. If you would like to attend that session, let me know, and I will forward you the meeting invite for that particular session.
Okay, great. That session does come up today at 3, so it's in about an hour. So we can hang on here for another few minutes. If anyone does want to participate, that just shoot a note in the chat, and Jackie will follow up. I think we got someone that wants to attend, so we'll make sure that Tiffany gets an invite there. And we have another one as well, Jackie.
Yep.
And while those are coming in, you know, we just want to thank you guys. We know that you guys are facing a lot of questions and probably changes just as we are. You know, no day or almost no week is looking the same as we all prepare to provide service to our students. And so, you know, thank you for taking the time out of your day to kind of listen to how we're trying to best approach the school year, as well as make sure we can provide as much support as we can to you guys, as well as the students that we support. So thank you very much. Again, we'll keep this open for anyone who's just chiming in to participate. But for everyone else, have a great afternoon and stay safe.
Yes, there is a training tomorrow also at 10.
Just for anyone who's still in, I can go back just so they can see our upcoming sessions. Yes, yes, Jackie's right. One tomorrow at 10, and then we look each Tuesday at 10 moving forward, it looks like. So.
Page.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording. We will stay on.
Yeah, thanks.